Hi, everybody. My name is Andy Sokolovich, and I am a Gallup certified strength coach and the owner of UnleashStrengths.com, nestled right here in the small Midwest town of Clinton, Iowa. Thematics. What you're watching right now is a video series created by Unleash Strengths to highlight the massive impact the StrengthsFinder assessment and the book StrengthsFinder 2.0 has had on now over 11 million users. It's our belief that the best way to promote its effectiveness and proven results is to interview those who've experienced the power of strengths-based development firsthand. And each person being interviewed today, actually it's just Nathanael today, but each person being interviewed on this broadcast is intimately aware of their strengths and wants nothing more than to share their unique story. For more information and to view a recorded version of this interview with the transcript, please visit UnleashStrengths.com. If you would like to be a guest on our show, Thematics, go ahead and shoot me an email, Andy, A-N-D-Y, at UnleashStrengths.com, or give us a ring, 815-441-2219. Again, our number, 815-441-2219. And as always, we're on Facebook. Hit us up, Facebook.com/UnleashStrengths. Today's guest is Mr. Nathanael Small. Nathanael, how are you doing? Thanks for being a guest. Introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and then go ahead and give us your top five.
Sure. Nathanael Small. I live in Sydney, Australia, so we're about 15, 16 hours ahead of you, so Christmas Eve is well and truly happening. And my top five are futuristic, strategic, learner, ideation, and responsibility.
Very nice. So now, talking about StrengthsFinder, who introduced you to this tool and why? Where did it come from? How did it get ingrained in your life? And what was your first experience with it?
Sure, my first experience was just over 7 years ago, so hadn't heard anything about strengths at the time. I was part of a sales business development team for a global coaching, training, consulting company, and the training manager of our state, he had done StrengthsFinder 1.0 a couple of years before, and he was always looking for stuff to do to work with us to help improve what we were doing, and he and one of the coaches who was part of the business put together a half-day team-building workshop with StrengthsFinder as the core tool. So 7 years ago, StrengthsFinder 2.0 had literally just come out, and so we all took the StrengthsFinder 2.0 assessment back then, which was just the top five, and that was all you could ever get access to. And we did this half-day workshop, so that was my first exposure. And I was somebody who, by that stage of my life, had taken almost every personal assessment tool, personality profile that was in major use in the marketplace, and thought I had a fairly good handle on who I was and how I did stuff. But the StrengthsFinder assessment at that time was a huge aha for me, largely because it answered the question for me, why is it that I am so successful in this current role in terms of performance when I don't have what people would recognize as the classic kind of strengths as people understood them then for how you would succeed. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the lights went on in a fairly significant way around the assessment.
So since that day, tell us a little bit about your strengths journey. I mean, you said you had some insight immediately. Your top five explained why you were good at the role that you were filling at the time. But now, what have you done since then? I mean, how have you kind of embraced your top five and been able to apply them in your everyday activities?
Yep. Okay. So I mean, from doing the assessment, then I then started to be more aware of how I was using them in my role, which I think was significant in the first instance. Interestingly, when I first did the assessment, the guy who took us through said, I can't understand why futuristic isn't in your top five, because when I took the assessment, the top five that I had, three of them are still in my top five, but futuristic didn't appear. So that got me curious, and one of the things I wanted to do was take the assessment again to see if anything was different, and if so, why. And the learner in me kicked in, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about the assessment. And at that time, Gallup really only had first break all the rules, now discover your strengths and Strengths Finder 2.0. There wasn't the huge bank of resources that they've opened up to the world over the last 2 years. And I discovered frustratingly that you had to actually set up a whole new profile with a new email and actually change your identity if you wanted to take the assessment again. I didn't take it again, as it turns out, until 3 years later, but what it did was help me realise that I was going to hit a plateau within that role, and I needed a new challenge to help me continue to apply who I was. And a lot of that was about the structure of the organisation, not being a strengths-focused organisation. They were really focused on some very hard commercial stuff. So I started hunting for a role that would better fit, and was able to use my talents to identify a role that was. And it was a complete change in industry. But the major client was the same. So they wanted somebody who had a lot of client knowledge, not necessarily industry-specific technical knowledge. And so I moved from education into manufacturing in material science engineering, which was when people look at my story on the supervision, they go, "How'd you do that?" Well, it was because I was able to draw on my top five at the time, which was input and learner very heavily 1 and 2, to absorb vast amounts of information very quickly and be able to then take that information with strategic and come up with the pathways of how to apply what they were doing into this particular customer market. So for the next 3 years, I found myself in a good zone of using my talents and working at them becoming strengths. And that was all without really having the language. I didn't engage with Gallup directly to find out more. But then towards the end of 2011, 2012, when that role was finishing up, I actually then took the assessment again at the end of 2012, and futuristic came in at number 1. So I learnt, the key learning from that whole experience was that when people first take the assessment, which I know is some of your focus, of what do I do to take action and get stuff happening, it's 80% accurate out of the gate, but it's also highly contextual. So if you're honest when you take it in your current context, whatever that is, it will tell you what talents you are drawing on right now to try and perform in the role. Because you can't not do that. You cannot, as you know, you cannot not be who you are. Right. So you're going to try and find a way for the talents that are going to best serve you and who you are to perform in the role. So that explained to me why futuristic was actually number 6. When I finally got access to the 34, which I did via the back door, I found a Gallup person who specialised in executive coaching around the 34 themes, and I actually had taken the assessment 3 times by the time I found them, and they gave me my full 34 of all 3, which was fantastic because I then was able to put them all together and average out the results and get what I consider now to be probably the most accurate picture of who I am, which is the top 5 I gave you, which was a real revelation to me. I mean, the coach was a bit stunned because I did all of this before we actually met, but it made sense. It made perfect sense to me as to why I even did that. Because once I knew what my truer top 5 was, it allowed me to focus even more on how I use those talents.
Yeah, you have that's a great answer. You've done a lot of extensive research in this, and that's I applaud your efforts. But so talk a little bit about the time where you realized that I'm in a position where I may plateau here. I have to find a new challenge. I have to find something that suits my strengths a little bit more and allows me to kind of grow. How did you kind of develop that confidence in order to make that change?
Well, in the coaching trained consulting company, for me, the confidence came because I was successful in the role. Every time we had a review, I would build a case for, well, here's why I've been successful, and if you want me to be more successful, I think we need to look seriously at this as my future direction. So, so it allowed me the opportunity to, I guess, advocate for myself. And that success and that kind of positive upward spiral of ongoing success gave me the breathing room to do that. Where the biggest challenge comes, and if people haven't read it, I think it's really helpful to get hold of Gallup's book, Follow This Path, because that's really their Bible on how you turn an organisation into a high-performing entity by focusing on engagement of people through their unique talents. Because once people have got their talent themes understood, then step 2 is the right fit within the organisation. And that doesn't mean superficially what you'll see, what I'm sure you've seen, Andy, is that a lot of people when they first do the test, they ask, what kind of career am I suited for? Well, that's actually the wrong question to ask, because anyone's top 5 can perform highly in almost any role. I mean, where things like Myers-Briggs help is to say, well, if your energy comes from introversion, then you need to consider a role where you're not having to continuously engage with lots of new people all the time. Whereas StrengthsFinder will tell you who you are, and strengths-based leadership gives you fantastic tips, very, very action-based insights on how you can apply your themes to leading people in the role you are in. So what I found was that I was being able to identify, and this again was without having read Follow This Path, and when I did, I got this huge aha, so what I was actually doing was, okay, I was getting to the point where I was applying my talents as best as I could within the constraints of the organisation, and then the role fit started to become the issue as to why I wasn't performing. So they needed to think about how, not just me, but how they actually structured supporting the entire sales team, so that each of the salespeople could do their roles better. So that's how, for me, I found I was able to have the confidence to address I need to find something new, or I'm plateauing here. I could see that the organisation wasn't going to restructure internally as to how they did the work so that I could continue to grow. So that I need to find a role where I have a lot more control or authority over how that's shaped. So the role in manufacturing was a greenfields opportunity to introduce new technology into the Australian market. So they were heavily reliant on my knowledge and expertise of the market. So I had a lot of bandwidth to pursue, I guess, designing and architecting how we went to market with the offering. So, which I know is something as a marketer you're passionate about. So.
Yeah, it is something I'm passionate about, and I think, what advice would you give our listeners who, I mean, you had the confidence and the ability to go to your supervisor, your management team, or your upper leadership and express to them that, and advocate on behalf of yourself and say, this is what I need from you in order to be more effective. But what advice would you give somebody who's maybe a little bit more timid or is not let's say, is working up to be strong enough to approach that conversation? I mean, how do you enter that conversation without sounding demanding?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me, the value of having my top 5, where the first 4 are strategic thinking, and actually I have 7 of the 8 strategic thinking themes in my top 12. So I'm
Mm.
heavily biased towards being quite clinical about how to view a situation. And a lot of it, the first thing is that you need to realise is that your job will never give you 100% of what you need. I mean, what they hire you for is performance. Okay? They're hiring you to perform in a specific role, and step one is if you aren't able to perform in that specific role, then you've got to work through why is that about you, and own that for yourself. And this is where my responsibility kicks in. My supporting theme at number 5 is you got to take ownership of that for yourself, and identify what the blockages are, and then are they internal to you, or are they with the organisational system, and then looking at what your talent themes are, how can I draw on those to approach having the conversations that I need to have, and thinking through what it is that's not identifying what's not working. I appreciate that can often be really challenging for people who are heavily biased on relationship building talents, particularly empathy, harmony, connectedness. Interestingly, empathy and harmony are my 34 and 33. So they need to spend time with people who have that ability to think strategically about the situation, and also who have some execution. Like you'll see my 5th talent theme is an executing theme. In my top 10, I have 6 strategic thinking, 2 influencing, and 2 executing. So that defines and shapes a lot of how I can just approach something very clinically and identify, here's the ball, in US speak, here's the ball, here's the touch line, or the touchdown line, the end zone. How am I going to get that ball into the end zone if I'm the quarterback calling the plays? So you have to think of yourself in that space, and so I would say if you're really struggling, it's well worth sitting with somebody who understands StrengthsFinder and can help you get a really good handle on where you are at with your appreciation and activity around the tool, and how mature your talents are, because that's probably the single biggest mistake that people make when they start with the tool and get excited about it, is they are themes of talent. Okay, a talent is a repeated pattern of thinking, feeling, or behaviour. It's not a strength until you have mastery, until you can flawlessly execute over and over again, until you have unconscious competence around that particular theme, which is exciting in a sense because it's a lifelong journey. But most people start from a position of ignorance, and they have to unlearn most of what they've learned about assessments, and they have to learn what positive psychology is and how to approach that positive view even of themselves to embrace the truth about themselves.
I think you hit the nail right on the head there when you said kind of starting out with a little bit of ignorance. I mean, a lot of times when I talk to my clients and people that I coach, it's what changes or modifications can you make in the workplace to better apply your talents as you develop them in the strengths. Necessarily the first thing they usually want to do is go to those influencers or decision makers within the organization and say, well, these are my top 5 and this is what I need from you in order to be more effective. First step I always say is, what can you take responsibility of first and make those changes on your own, because only then will you start to develop those talents in the strengths. And then once you get more aware of how to apply those, then the conversation starts at an organizational level. So
yes. So I think and it depends on the maturity of their organisation around these concepts, because everybody is now starting to just talk about engagement in the workplace, and so you just draw on the measurable data that Gallup has, saying people who do what they do best every day are this % more likely to be engaged, are this % less likely to disengage and leave. So they're beginning to there's still a long way to go, but I think the people are beginning to wake up to the power of and the truth of positive psychology and how strengths link to engagement in the workplace. So yeah, but for the individual, you need to know yourself and then know enough about your role. So know yourself, know your role, and what is performance defined as, and how do I first show that I am meeting or exceeding the performance that is asked of me, because then I've got the oxygen to in the room to sit at the table and start having a conversation. If you're not actually performing to expectation, then why would they even bother?
And that's a huge thing. Is a lot of people in today's workplace don't even know what's expected of them. I mean, they know what their job synopsis or job description is, but they don't know what those expectations are. And I think that's kind of a flaw in our modern day management system, where we're not giving a strong sense of direction. I mean, how are you supposed to get to an end result or follow a path to a goal when you have absolutely no idea what direction to head? So. Yeah,
and I guess because I spent most of my time in what I call market development, both sales and marketing, I came from sales. It's all about the numbers. Like you have a target of revenue that you need to achieve, and that requires activity. So that gave me a very strong numbers focus. And then when I went into the manufacturing space, with engineering, it's all about the numbers. If we're going to design a product, it either passes or it fails. There's no in between. So that played really well for me with strategic thinking, because it meant you're always dealing with largely what's the concept or solution, and does it work? There was no room for debating how you felt about something, because the product either was designed properly and worked, or it didn't and didn't. So yeah, I think that it's really important for people to develop that individual awareness, and then within their team and the organisation, and start trying to do your best to bloom where you're planted, and apply the talents where you are right now. And if you feel a bit restricted with that, well, then your top 5 are who you are pretty much most of the time in every sphere of life. You can't help but not. So find another role where you do already have a sense of being energized and engagement, and look at how you can improve that and learn from that role the principles of how I apply it back into the workplace. So that would be my roundabout way of getting to the point of building the confidence to have the conversation. Define performance and start meeting or exceeding it using the talents that you are already drawing on, and figuring out how you actually do that. So find someone who can help you unpack that and start to take action around it.
Very well. So now you and I share a common passion for strengths-based development, positive psychology, and like you said, I love the terminology you use, bloom where you're planted. Now, as you have grown and become more strengths-aware, and you've talked about this within your social circle or within some coworkers, have you met a lot of resistance as far as sometimes you hear when somebody says, "Oh, you should take the assessment." You sometimes get that response, it's just another assessment. Why should I take it? What is the benefits for my time when I sit behind that computer and I go through 177 questions? What am I going to get out of it? And what is your response?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do a lot of, and as a marketing person, pre-positioning of the tool. I use the tool as a key part, along with a couple of other strengths-based assessments, of how I work closely with mentoring people. To give you the difference, coaching is very much about how you help people get agreement to take a course of action. You don't necessarily have to have their industry knowledge and experience. A lot of it is about being able to help them understand their own context, and you don't need to be an expert in their field to do that. Mentoring is much more about, I have life experience that you can't argue with because it's my deep experience. So for me, I come from a place of having spent more than half my life healthily obsessing about understanding self and trying to find best-in-class tools that help you do that. This is the best combination to date that I've been able to find that helps you do that. So I come from a place of offering experience, and normally the people I work with, if you want to talk niche, and I don't like talking niche, I tend to prefer cluster, which is kind of an aspirational market of people. I tend to work with senior or emerging leaders who are already hungry for growth. So they're always looking for the next thing to develop around, the next thing that's going to give them an edge in how they operate, and they're often people who've worked hard to get where they are, and they've already recognised that self-knowledge is a valuable thing. So Lindsay specialises in has this great space in the 20s to 30s where a lot of the adult identity discovery stuff really starts to come into play. So she's got a great market there from lots of people from all over the place.
Right.
But the people I tend to deal with are, because Lindsay's early 30s, I'm mid 40s. I tend to deal with people mid 30s to early 50s who are very much in that I'm in the peak season of my life for contribution, because I'm often in or starting to assume senior leadership, and I know I need. I really need to have an edge and know how to keep sharpening my edge to keep being the best that I can be. So I look for a market. I distinctly look for markets who are predisposed to the related concepts that allow you to introduce the tool. And by pre-positioning, I also use that to frame the context around the tool so that they buy in to the process and are happy to do the tools, and then trust me to help decode it for them. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I think, a lot of the things that you said, one of the things that I've realized too, and I agree with you, is really giving people the opportunity just to become, take the time to become a little bit introspective and actually talk and focus on themselves. A lot of professionals don't have, and although it's a necessary allotment of time to think about yourself and how you can continue to progress and sharpen your own edge, a lot of people don't take that time because sometimes they feel a little guilty or selfish when they think about themselves as opposed to others. And I always tell my clients, now's the time where we're going to focus on you. Let's focus on what you can do better and how you can harness the power of your natural God-given talents to develop them into strengths and grow as a professional. So,
yeah, the simple analogy is if the plane starts to go down, they always tell you to put your own oxygen mask on first.
Absolutely.
So why? So you can help others. So there's an appropriate level of self-focus that's required if you're actually going to be in a good space to do your best.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So another question, you kind of touched on this before. Someone has just taken the assessment. They heard you talking about it, or they heard this podcast, and they had just taken the assessment. They're sitting behind their computer. They printed out their Strengths Insight report. They're looking at it, and now, say they're in a room alone. They don't have access to a strengths coach or somebody knowledgeable like yourself. What would be your number one action step that they take right away to start to be able to kind of harness that ability and then apply it?
Okay, well, I would say a couple of things. One, the number one thing is realize it's a snapshot in time. And two, when you read the Insights report, I make a big deal out of pointing out to people, it's not a cookie-cutter report. Okay, so many assessments that people take, whether it's DISC or MBTI or whatever, it's all template-based. That Insight report is custom-built, where the Gallup software takes that top 5 and all of the descriptors that are in around those 5 themes in order is based on the dynamics between those 5 themes, the interplay between those 5. So how my report talks about futuristic is very different to how your report talks about futuristic. There might be a few words or phrases, but my futuristic is in the context of it being number 1 with 3 more strategic thinking themes and then an executing thing. Yours is lower in the top 5 and it's heavily dominated by woo. and strategic. Okay, so so it's a snapshot in time. So if it doesn't quite feel right, then it's highly likely that if you've been honest in doing it, that these are the talents that you are drawing on right now. It's not necessarily your ideal top 5, because how many people have the right fit-in role in organisations, but it's the combination that you are drawing on to try and perform. Okay. The second thing that I say to them around that is take the report and get 3 coloured pens. Uma, when you interviewed him, talked about this. He got this from me. It's the get a red pen, an orange pen, and a green pen, and go through and highlight highlighters even, and highlight everything in green that you positively agree with. You go, yes, that I really agree with that, with those statements. Orange for, yeah, I think so, possibly, but I'll proceed with caution. And red, no, I flat out disagree with this statement. And when people do it honestly with their report, they tend to have very little red. So it tends to be more a lot of green and some orange, or if it's not their ideal top 5, maybe 50-50 orange-green. So it gets them in the frame of saying yes to what is true. And also introduces the Gallup used the traffic lights metaphor around the 34, so it presets them around a language and a contextual metaphor of driving through traffic in the car, driving your strengths that you can use to help people engage their right brain around the subject. So those would be the 2 main things. If you can't talk to anyone who knows about it, do those 2 things first. Then find somebody who knows what they're talking about with it, and get them to help you start to unpack what it means for you.
Those are excellent steps, and I love the multicolored pen or highlighter option. I mean, I've used go through and highlight what that's me, but I never actually incorporated a separate color to highlight something that you totally disagree with. And I'd be interested to actually try that more often, because, like you stated, I think people will be surprised by how little they're completely disagreeing with on the assessment. I mean, a lot of times they're just concentrate on the theme name itself as opposed to actually the description. So great insights. So my last question is, well, I do want to ask this one, and I think that you're going to have probably you probably won't be able to select just one, because you're well aware of how they all play off of each other. But what is your favorite theme in your top 5, and why?
I mean, I have to be, in being completely honest, it always has been my number 1, which is futuristic. Because I think a couple of reasons. Someone knew it should have been in my top 5 who wasn't even Gallup certified in any way, shape, or form. When their trainer said, I can't understand why futuristic isn't there, it put a seed in my mind to say, well, if it's not, why isn't it? So it set me on a very healthy course of discovery. And I think also because when it's mature, and I'm still, the next 7 years for me are all about this. The dark side of futuristic is that you're never present. Okay? And if you're following the zeitgeist of thinking now, there's a huge obsession with mindfulness now in the marketplace. And I mean, Google has taken its internal course, which blends mindfulness and emotional intelligence and things, and they now offer it on the open market, an internal Google course, and it's real heavy on mindfulness is just being fully present to the moment in terms of where you are, and futuristics find that really hard to do because you're always excited about the new and the next. Okay, so for me, it's recognizing that the future can be a millisecond, or it can be one like a day, an hour, a minute, and I think maturity in futuristic is being able to shift that lens of focus in the moment for the situation that you are in, and for me that's really significant because you being in the military would have a lot of exposure to this. Is that in the last 18 months I've only come to realise that I had major trauma in my early 20s, which fundamentally hardwired my neuroanatomy in a particular way of functioning, which I was completely unaware of. And I also, looking back now with 2020 hindsight, hard for somebody who doesn't have context, so I had to work really hard at it, but I realized just how much I had been actually living with, having depression from mild to extreme, anxiety from episodes to highly generalized, and trauma, all forcing my brain to be hardwired around certain ways of responding. So strengths have given me a language and a way to identify. In spite of that, I know who my best self is, and a way to be able to work and grow through the healing process from those illnesses and episodes to become more and more of who I truly am. And if I didn't have futuristic there and strategics immediately supporting it, I think I probably would have found myself in far darker places than I was, because I was always able to picture a possible future that was good and identify multiple ways that I could possibly get there. Did I do that very well? No. But once I became aware in my mid to later 30s of this language and how it helped identify the truth about me that was good, the obsession kicked in. Because what trauma does is it messes with your sense of identity and sense of self. So to know that in spite of all of that, beneath the rewiring of my brain, there was this truth about me that was good, and I needed to. The way out was going through it and healthily obsessing about that goodness. I think for me, a lot of my future contribution is going to be around helping people understand what's really going on with that for them, and how to use strengths to embrace what Seligman calls post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. So yeah, that's why it's my favourite, because if I didn't have it as my number one, I think I would be in a much worse place than I am now.
Nathanael, I think that's a great place to stop. I just want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to interview you. I mean, not only are you extremely intelligent and strengths aware, but you provided our audience with some great action steps that they can apply immediately to get the ball rolling and really become aware of what they're just naturally good at and embrace that to sharpen their edge and just become a person who's aware of themselves and aware of what they have to offer. And I absolutely love this opportunity, and I love this interview. Thank you so much for being on our show.
No, that's fine. Happy to do so. I mean, it's Gallup has an office here in Australia, and I just found out they've had 53 people get certified in the last year, and they're programming ahead, which is great. I mean, it's all about helping shift the language in the culture that we currently have around work, and the more people who get it and want to start living it, I think the better off we're going to be.
And I know, Nathanael, you are active on the Gallup Call to Coach Facebook page, I believe, or is it the Gallup Strengths Finder page where you're most active?
Well, both as it's appropriate. For me, it's about a measurably useful contribution. And for people, I guess, if they're into Facebook, understand the difference between those two groups. Call to Coach is a Gallup-run group, which is because Gallup is obsessed about getting 1 million coaches. They have this belief that 1 million coaches is going to shift the culture. I would say yes, and that's another conversation to that. But Gallup Strengths Finder was started by Joseph Dvorak, who had been in an education environment using Gallup for a long, long time inside a college, I think it was, and he just set up the group as a place for people who've just discovered their strengths to begin to get some language around them. So that's probably the last day. Join that group, and when you do, say your top 5, and the tribe will say hi. and people will volunteer to a point helpful stuff. But I'd also say to people, don't overuse it, because free advice Advice like this is worth paying for.
Right.
So as soon as you hit the wall in terms of your own application, put money in your budget to find someone who can take you further.
All right, sir. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on this, your Christmas Eve. It's approaching 9:38 a.m. Sydney time. It's now 4:38 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I'm going to let you get, you got some more shopping to do, some gift wrapping, and prepare for the holidays. So thank you once again for being on our show, Nathaniel. It was a pleasure as always, and I'd like to have you back maybe in a couple months to touch base and hear more of your great insights if you'd be willing.
Sure, not a problem.
All right, sir. Thank you, and I will talk to you later. This is Andy Sokolovich with UnleashStrengths.com. This has been another episode of Thematics. Remember, if you would like to basically swap seats with Nathaniel and be a guest on this show, there's a couple ways you can reach us. First way, shoot me an email, Andy, A-N-D-Y, at UnleashStrengths.com, or give me a call, 815-441-2219. Again, 815-441-2219. No pressure. It's just like two people sitting across from each other at a pub or a bar or a restaurant talking about things that we love, and that's our strengths. Again, this broadcast is live. If you would like to, you can always hit us up on UnleashStrengths.com/live during the broadcast time. As we close out this interview, it will be available for replay on our website, UnleashStrengths.com. All right, everybody, this is Andy Sokolovich, and I will talk to you guys soon. See ya.